It's been almost 4 decades since the U.S. lost war in Vietnam and almost 58,000 troops, but now American war toys may find themselves again on the territory of Vietnam. According to the State Department and their latest statement coming out late on Thursday, the U.S. will partially lift a ban on lethal weapons export to Vietnam. And thus, this move would see at least 5 new patrol boats heading over to Vietnam, as well as several P-3 Orion surveillance planes. Now, this move would certainly be of benefit to the U.S. defense industry. In fact, those above-mentioned planes, P-3 Orion surveillance planes, they will be replaced one time sooner or later by the Lockheed Martin hardware. So basically, in a nutshell, the U.S. is selling outdated equipment to Vietnam, which would also be happy to bolster its defense capabilities in the maritime parts of its territory, particularly in the South China Sea. Now, the one side which would definitely be unhappy to hear such news is China. For the past 5 years, the U.S. has been on what it's described as the Asian-Pacific pivot, directing a lot of its troops to the Asian region. In fact, in some of the countries like South Korea, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore, the number of U.S. troops stationed on the soil of those countries has increased dramatically. And despite us hearing the statements coming from the highest levels of politics in Washington that this policy is not directed at containing China, officials in Beijing and many analysts, many military analysts worldwide are not quite buying it. In fact, some of them are suggesting that this is a sort of new Cold War, that containing China militarily would do no good for the relations between Beijing and Washington. And we're talking here about the hugely increased trade cooperation over the past 7 to 10 years. The trade between China and the U.S. has increased by at least 40%, and in fact, China now is the second largest trade partner of the United States, the trade turnover exceeding $500 billion a year. China would be definitely unhappy to hear this because it has been having a lot of rifts with its neighbors in the southern Chinese Sea. Southern Chinese Sea, in fact, is the core of the problem. There are a lot of islands which historically did belong to China at some point or another, but now these islands are occupied by other different countries like Philippines, like Vietnam, like South Korea, and those islands are believed to have to be possessing a lot of oil in its offshores. So China has a lot to fight for here, not only the historic justice, but also energy resources. And the fact that the U.S. is increasing its presence, its military presence in the region, as some officials in Beijing are saying, is negating any kind of productive negotiations between China and its neighbors. Now, the officials in in Washington have been saying that they're not trying to wedge any kind of disagreements and any kind of hostile behavior between China and its neighbors, but the latest move with the U.S. offering its military hardware to Vietnam is unlikely to go well in China, and we are waiting for any kind of official statement coming from Beijing on that matter. Alexei Rashevsky, RT, reporting from New York City.